So I just wanted to share a personal experience. Now I will say, with all the humility after your speech and this concern we've seen, it's just like an experience of an arrival in Lisbon, and that can be seen in a more universal way, and not like a small personal drama, but just and I've been thinking about doing a PowerPoint, and I thought, actually, because I'm a writer, that I might make the images come to your minds without putting them on the screen. So I hope it will work. Another place. It is 7 in the morning. The Orient train station, with this name, calling elephants, palm trees, and endless warm nights, looks like an antique cathedral. Under its huge cream-color arches is a very small cafe. I'm sitting to one of its tables, surrounded by my 6 suitcases. I come from Paris. Between the Alphacinia waking up, taking their metro or suburban trains, I'm here. No one waits for me. I don't know, neither in 1 week, nor in 1 month, nor in 1 year, what will be my daily life.
Working in the non-profit culture sector, I am certainly not making a fortune. For me, it goes much deeper than fashion, and it goes much deeper than money. And for Lisbon, it must go much deeper than that. Why Lisbon? As Catarina Vaz Pinto has already begun to say so effectively, it's about openness. Open space, open door, open mind. We citizens cannot raise a collective voice in defense of the city, and we can't advocate for our needs and our interests within it if we do not first understand what's at stake. Why Lisbon? Lisbon is winking at the tourists, and she's flirting with the entrepreneurs, and she is opening her arms to the real estate speculators with euros twinkling in their eyes. But Lisbon is still at that fork in the road. Her future is not yet written. Lisbon is not done yet. Lisbon's not lost yet. She's not sold yet, and she's not bought yet. Why Lisbon? Because here, for now, there's still space for the rest of us for whom luxury is a stiff and ill-fitting garment. What we want is a living wage, an affordable home, nourishing food, and most importantly, when the wage earning is done, we want enough time left over, enough cognitive space to breathe, to dream. For us, it is not about money, because Lisbon still remembers that time is far more precious than money. Lisbon still worships gods other than money, still knows that luxury is luxury, and luxury is smoke and mirrors.
About Lisbon, and so we became like a monopoly. So this started this rush to have access to buildings, and this value of property purchase has been increasing steadily ever since 2012. This year, 2018, has been also expressing this trend. Lisbon grew up about 20%, the number of homes that were transacted, and this international interest in Lisbon is, of course, because Lisbon is still attractive, but we don't know if this will keep on, because actually prices are getting higher, and there's not much more available. City is not that big that could allow this investment to progress every day. So,
well, Lisbon can learn from Berlin's best. Well, that might be, I'll introduce in a minute. But pressure. Is there actually pressure? This is international tourist arrivals. I didn't make the infographics. It's by the International Tourism Board. You can see in 2012 it was 1 billion international touristic arrivals, and in 2020 it will, this is kind of tomorrow, it will be 1.4, so 40% more, and in 2030 it will be 1.8 billion, so 80% more. Is it possible to cut down? Is it possible to say, yeah, we don't want that kind of exponential growth anymore? I think it is maybe possible, but it's just possible then when people, like Joanna said before, have an idea about their city, and the Lisboetas, I think they have an idea about their city, and formulate that idea, and have a kind of mission statement for a city. So Lisbon, listen up, these guys teach you a lesson. For instance, Frank, he is a bouncer at King's Eyes in Berlin. Or Roger, he is a bouncer at Labor in Berlin. Or Sven, he is a bouncer at Bergheim in Berlin. So they are stars in Berlin. They're bouncers, they enforce rules, they are the gatekeepers, but they're stars. They're cool. They're selectors. They're not bouncers. They are selectors. So what do selectors do? They're curators of a special space. A club. A club is a space where people came together and said, we want to have a special space for our music, for our friends, for the things we like to do, we might be not able to do in public space. So we want our special club. So they preserve these atmospheres. He knows that I'm a fan of that. Maybe you can do self-made gentrification. That means there's still space underdeveloped in Lisbon. And there you can say, okay, we want to have a more balanced life. We don't want to have everything concentrated in the center. Because some people, for instance, the clubs, they don't want to be in the center. Why should they be in the center? Or some people don't want to live in the center. Others want to, but not everybody. So you can say, maybe there's an undeveloped area. I mean, you had that in Parc des Nações. It was a dump before. It was horrible there. And now it's completely different. So, Lisbon, who we are, how we want to live, that you have to define for yourself. And it's about trust. So it's a kind of communicative process between the people and its politicians, mainly everybody. It's a kind of where you get to these kind of mission statements. For instance, yesterday I had a cab driver, he went mad when talking about elderly people having to leave their homes. He said, this puts me mad, and it was real anger I could feel in that man. Of course, I understood it. But I think 80–90% of the people in Lisbon will feel that anger. So it is part of a mission statement. We don't want to be a city where elderly people are forced out of their homes. How can we develop? Of course, it's not about preserving the status quo. There has to be a development, but it has to be a sustainable development, as I already said. And there are lots of things to do. What measures? There are lots of measures you can take as a city. You can, for instance, say, okay, yes, cruise ship, maybe it's a nice idea, but maybe just a certain number of cruise ships a year. You can have planes coming into Lisbon, maybe not that many. You can do lots of kind of limitations. Of course, the dumbest thing is you can have a city tax or a higher city tax, but that, for instance, I wouldn't recommend, but when you discuss, you will get to lots of possibilities yet that you have, and how strict you have to adopt these measures. So,
well, as you can imagine, I'm very pleased to be here. And so my task today was just to sort of summarize a bit the issues that we in part this morning discussed. And as you know, the whole theme is about the pressure. There's lots of pressure. There's pressure of certain big cities, but also obviously smaller ones. But today we're going to focus a bit more on the very big ones, particularly in Europe. And when one looks ahead, one of the things I think we all know is that we've really got to be alert about the dynamics of cities. Things are changing in ways that means that business as usual perhaps won't work in order to solve the problems we have. Everybody knows about the transformations that are happening everywhere, but in some places, Lisbon is an example, it seems to be happening a bit more quickly. And some people will of course say, oh, this is completely out of control, what's happening, how can we look forward in a coherent way? And one of the things about this out of control, of course, is the speed of change, and just in passing. People walk faster now in cities, they eat faster, they do lots of things faster, they try to think faster, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But one of the central issues that has enabled all of this, as you know, is the gigantic breakthrough that is, of course, the digitized world. And the impacts of that have only really begun. I mean, obviously, public administrations might have to confront that, but also digitized world in the sense of artificial intelligence, driverless cars, all of these things. Whether we need them is a different question, which I'll leave to later. But I saw this picture in front of Dublin Library, and it said, we spend more minutes in our virtual worlds than outside. And yes, that may be true or not true, but one of the things that's completely clear from research is that physical place matters more than ever before, even the more connections we have. So actually, face-to-face feeling that other person is absolutely key. Now, within all of this movement, there's all these words like the smart city, sensorizing this, and using phones to do interesting things. Of course, that is part of that new infrastructure. But just to remind you, and this is also an opportunity and a problem, once you think that the biggest hotel chain in the world, which is Airbnb, owns no hotels of its own, the biggest taxi company in the world, Uber, owns no taxis of its own, and the biggest media company in the world, Facebook, produces none of its own actual media, then of course we know that these disruptive technologies and these platforms are completely changing the way the economy works. One potential good thing, of course, is you can share things, you can share taxis, you don't have to own things, and so on. And you can obviously share buildings, and many other things are being shared. But that's also affecting how institutions that are quite traditional present themselves and exist. This is the headquarters of the Deutsche Bank, or one of them, in Friedrichstraße in Berlin. When you go in there, you feel, is this some sort of Zen meditation center? You know, to find actually someone who's dealing with banking is extremely difficult. There's obviously an incubation piece in there, and a garden, and somewhere in the background there's someone who might say, I'll give you a credit card. And the same is another point, because what I'm really talking about is place, how people see place and space is actually changing. Obviously the here-there phenomenon, they could be here and there. And this is a cafe chain in Moscow, started in Moscow, called the Zifferblatt, where you get your coffee free, you get your croissant free, you get everything free, but you need that clock there. There's also versions in London. And you go in there, you sit down and put your hand on the clock. And then, yeah, if you've been there for an hour, 20 minutes, that's €6, rather than the 3 cups of coffee or anything else. And that's just one example of something which is about time and access to things rather than ownership. And because you could describe, and I'm being simplistic, that the 20th century was the period of ownership, owning stuff, cars, which we only use 10% of the time, or 12%. An electric drill works for 200 hours. On average, people only use in the lifetime of the drill for 2 hours and 30 minutes. So there's so much stuff that is not used, which is why one of the biggest growth industries in the world is the self-storage industry. Because there's all this stuff that people are putting into self-storage, but also because people are moving around, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So there are some big questions that emerge there, and one of them, of course, is that the world is a smaller place. This is, of course, good, and perhaps less good in some context. And it being the smaller place relates to this thing that digitization has enabled, that you can be here and there at the same time. So I don't need to elaborate on that. And that, for me, raises a big question, which I personally find interesting, and I wrote a little book about that, or a fact book rather, which is called The Civic City in a Nomadic World. And the one-sentence summary of the fact big book is, where do we belong when everything is on the move? Where am I? Who am I? What is my identity? And so on. And that has a bit of a fracture, and the reason I got that cover is, how do we heal that fracture between the insider and the outsider? And as you know, when we feel not overwhelmed in the world, we feel more social. When we feel a bit, it's too much, too many new people coming in, too many strangers, I can't handle the digitized world, then we become more tribal. And this, for me, is one reason, one of the many reasons, for example, for Brexit, Trump, and many other political manifestations we see at the moment. So you can probably understand yourself that obviously the world is in motion, people are moving around at an extraordinary speed, cities are in motion. This happens to be Sao Paulo, but you know, there's cranes everywhere. There was a crane just as we came to this office here. And then the question is, when there's all this movement between people, some of whom, we heard a lovely example earlier today, the older lady who said, I used to welcome tourists, but now there are too many in Lisbon and I feel less welcoming than I was before. But nevertheless, cities are about difference and different people, I mean big cities. So this question of the zones of encounter are absolutely key, but within that, where are these places? I'm calling them places of empathy. Now that does not mean, I'm not suggesting we all need to love each other or anything like that, but at least that we're broadly sympathetic to the other. And that's where obviously these are more open cities, and obviously the history of Lisbon and Portugal has been broadly an open place, where I just hope that's not under threat. And the reason I'm saying that is because, and I've already indicated that, the world is turning to its darker face. And what I mean by it's turning to its darker face is there's an apprehension in the air, there's this tension between our potentially open social selves and the idea of going inwards, our tribal selves, and so on and so on. And that's the context we're faced with when people of different backgrounds and so on are of course living together, which is why I love that, you know, that place in Lisbon where it says, you know, city of tolerance and all of that, is just an indication of one of the big central questions of the age, because of this issue about, is this my place, who am I, what are my identities, and so on. So if you look at the city and feel it, and we all feel it as we're wandering around, you know, cities are basically an emotional experience with psychological consequences. The issue is, or to me it is, it's all quite fragile. When we look at these dynamic places, Lisbon is one, it is quite fragile. It can all fall apart. The good things that you have can suddenly flip over. Yes, we want tourists, but are there too many? Yes, we want that. Do we want cars? Yes, but can there be too many? So that question of fragility, so essentially city making is about the management of fragility, I think. And that means that city makers, decision makers, and lots of other people, we just all, I think, need to be alert. And if you ask people, and if we're looking ahead about where cities are going, one of the things you see, this is Lisbon as you recognize, is if you take this helicopter view of lots of cities, not only Lisbon, you can see there's a yearning for another kind of city. Obviously you want it, you know, to develop. But if you're looking at all these other cities, they also want to develop. But something's happened, and that yearning for this other city is expressed in many, many ways. these global organisations, this is partly to do with the World Urban Campaign, Habitat, all of the big global agreements about what is important to cities, they're all saying things that we all agree with. We want an inclusive, sustainable, da-di-da-di-da, da-di-da-di-da, resilience, every word you know, probably 8 words. Now the question is, why is this not happening? And I was to some extent involved in a bit of this, and what was never discussed in that was issues like corruption or interests groups, and certain things couldn't be said, but people still said we need an inclusive city or whatever. Clearly we agree with all that. And these same issues emerge in something called the Global Solutions Summit, which is an event that happens in Berlin, which says, essentially, we know broadly what the problems are, now is the time for solutions. And what they're particularly saying is cities are, and at the global level people are saying, cities are the places where often the problems are generated, but they're also the laboratories of the solutions that we may need. And one of the things about this yearning for this other city is that it's not all about money. It's not all about money. And Jan earlier today gave a little sort of provocative talk, and he was saying we've got to learn about the limitations. It isn't always about maximising the situation, and that is really, I think, one of the very big things. And in order to bend the market or bend the system in a city, to make it clear that it's not always about the highest price, for example, selling property or whatever, it really requires some deep courage to make that happen. And from my perspective, once people have a job and a bit of money and income, there are 5 things that seem to be very important for cities. And the 5 words to me are anchorage, something, where do I come from, who am I, heritage, call it, tradition, whatever, the family, the friends, all of that, something that is predictable, stable, and so on. But at the same time, a great city is about can-do, choices, options. I can make things happen. I've got an opportunity to do something I've never done before. Thirdly, that I can be connected, obviously, physically with people in my neighbourhood and wider groupings across the world, but also, air transport, train transport, and so on. And the 4th thing that people seem to want in a city is to give themselves the opportunity to flourish. And the opportunity to flourish could mean growing in some sense, I don't know, making more out of who one is, I don't know what, through education perhaps, even if you're 40, 50 or so. But anyway, growing in yourself. And 5thly, people want some sort of inspiration. Now, inspiration for many historically may or still be the church, but it may be artistic things. Inspiration can have all sorts of forms. But this question of inspiration, just sort of getting out of the normal day-to-day, seems to be incredibly important in making cities. Now, one of the issues when you say inspiration, often people say, I must build an icon building. There is the Bilbao effect. We will repeat it, and we will also get our Bilbao, and of course, 1 in 100 becomes that. But I often say, what do you want? 1 icon or 100 small things done well? Now, in a case like Lisbon, I don't think we need any icons because it is iconic in itself, and perhaps it's often about doing 100 small things well, and so on. And what partly this is all about is balancing in a big city very contradictory things, and we heard this already this morning a bit, which is essentially the best of the village feel, i.e. the bit that is not too claustrophobic, that is more about knowing each other and so on, with that wider world of being part of global, local, or whatever, however you want to describe that. And so, for me, and the first time I got involved in the Lisbon initiative, the Build the City thing, we said, what's the key issue? And I sort of said, well, heritage and creativity are actually great partners. It's often seen as either or, heritage doesn't work together with that. And that partnership really requires a sense of understanding the way that culture works and cultural literacy, because quite often I've discovered, at least from my perspective, that if you want people to change and adapt to a new world and come up with good solutions, you need to acknowledge the anchoring, the place, the heritage or whatever, and that makes them far more willing to change and adapt rather than just imposing change on people and saying, hey, isn't it all cool and let's be creative and so on. And so what that means in the end, if we go through the processes that cities have gone in the last 40 years, we're at the position, of course, where we want to deal with a planet-conscious world. And that raises very interesting questions, which was highlighted in the UN thing about habitat, which is basically, there's a battle between city and state. Who is the driver of how cities should work? Is it the state? Now, I would say, and we've written a bit about this, is that the state, the national government, often has the authority to generate the rules and incentive systems, and in Portugal and many other countries, the way law should work, different question, should be a bit more or less rigid, but anyway, let's leave that. But the legitimacy, cities have far more legitimacy often to do some of the quite important things you need to do if you're trying to become more planet conscious, because they're closer to the citizen, obviously. But so this is very much the whole beyond myself, the more we and me together approach to city making. But just as a reminder, the way the city development has happened in the last 30 years, you could divide it into 4 phases. The first was saying the infrastructure is not very good, a bit ugly and so on. So you see all sorts of examples, here is Malaga, of saying let's make the basic physical infrastructure attractive, more aesthetic and so on. Or even here, this is Adelaide Airport, where you can see that image in the front there is very like Aboriginal drawings and paintings, whereas the lines on the side are very Western linear thinking, A goes to B and so on, rather than the Aboriginal approach, which may be more circular and rounded. But that is a good example of heritage, in a sense, renewed in a modern context. The next phase, if you want to simplify these phases, was people saying, yeah, we've got good infrastructure. Hey, but look, there's this artistic stuff, this creative stuff. Let's bring that in. That can regenerate old buildings. That can, these are the pioneers and explorers that take difficult situations and come in. And then what follows are the lawyers later. No, sorry, you're a great lawyer. No, but then once all of that has been made safe and interesting, then other types of professions come in, or are labelled, more artistic types to come in there, because she knew, as everybody does, that these people often make inspiring environments and so on. And many people in many areas of Berlin, you could say, this hidden heroine there, she enabled that. But she's completely under the radar, so we felt we should honour her. So there we are. It's about moving from a no because culture to a yes if. Completely different. Easy to say these words. It's much better to say yes if, yeah, it's okay, if, rather than, it's not possible. And obviously, getting out of that narrow-minded conversation many of us have. So as it says in this graffiti in Krakow, I'm happy again, I don't know if they will be, but anyway, I've put that picture in there. And what this end, and I'm going to finish now, is a different form of planning, and this is collective planning, of course, with team partners, which is going away from that know, predict, and provide model. We need 75,000 tons of cement to do the road, and we will do that in 18 months, to something which I'm calling elastic planning, which means you have strategic principles, which is a bit like the vision. There are 3 things I am not going to negotiate on, full stop. But how the world is moving, how am I going to get there? I've got to be tactically flexible. But if you've got these non-negotiable principles, then you don't need to worry about it being tactical, because you've got an anchorage point which keeps a degree of stability and moving forward. So all of this obviously has to happen in a digital age, and that requires, of course, trust. Because the digital world, obviously, I mean, in general, I'm talking about trust, of course, because the link between the citizen and the public is fractured a bit, as well as between others and the media and all of that. And this trust thing, it's easy for me to just put the word trust there, is another one of these central questions that needs to be, how do you grow trust? You can only grow trust through practice, through doing things together. And that's why I keep on emphasizing that whatever one does has to be this broader partnership, and it's not an either-or thinking. And so the conclusion for me is all of this stuff that I'm talking about is less about physical things, it's about the soft infrastructure. And this has taken me 35 years to work out that sentence. The soft is the hard. Thank you very much.